Good morning, church. I hope that this past week has been a blessing of some kind for you. And I hope that this morning you can take the time to reflect on this past week and just count the blessings that God has poured out into your life. Be reminded and be encouraged. With that, let's begin. As you guys already know, I tend to get scared very easily. In Korean, we would call this 겁쟁이, and that's me. Right? I get scared so easily, and some of you guys like to take advantage of that. But with that, there's one thing that I naturally started to dislike, and that is surprises. Now, the whole idea of a surprise is this kind of sudden, unexpected event or something that is out of line of what you expect. And that's the kind of stuff that really scares me, right? The example that I've always given you is that when you're walking down a hallway, you're about to turn the corner, somebody jumps out and says boo, or maybe someone doesn't even do that, but then your heart jumps out of your chest and you start to break into a cold sweat. Yeah, those are the kind of surprises that I really don't like. But another surprise that also gets me off guard every single time, and it just evokes so much emotion out of me, is birthday surprises. You know, when people gather together for somebody's birthday, you want to surprise them, and so they, hide in a room, turn off all the lights, and they're just waiting for the birthday boy or birthday girl to come. And then the moment they come in, they jump out and surprise, happy birthday, right? That kind of stuff scares me, and I get like super emotional, and then everything else that comes with that, I become an emotional train wreck. But over the years, with many people trying to surprise me on my birthday or just surprise me in general, I've done a few things to kind of help prepare myself for these sudden events. And of course, this isn't to say that I'm immune to it and I don't get caught off guard, but there are a few things that I do so that I can better prepare myself for when they do actually happen. The first is I have to remind myself that it could happen at any time, any moment. Someone might pop out of nowhere and surprise me. And just knowing that fact and reminding myself of that helps me kind of prepare for it in my heart, in my mind, so that when it does happen, I won't be as scared. And some of you might think like, wow, that's so tiring. Like, that's so unnecessary. But trust me, if you're as scared as I am, then it's not as bad as you think. The second thing I do is whenever it comes to like big events or like my birthday that might come up, I always try to keep an eye out for suspicious activity, right? Are people planning on meeting up? Are people trying to get me to come to a certain place? Are they asking me questions about things that I like and I don't like weeks to my birthday? And usually when I do this, sometimes I seek and try getting insider scoop from people. I try to pry out of them if there are any plans, and sometimes it's successful and they tell me like, okay, yeah, it's gonna happen here, we're gonna be doing it then, and so that when the birthday actually happens, yes, it's surprising to a certain extent, but because I know that it was going to happen, I'm not an emotional train wreck. Think about those short clips that you find on the internet that they call jump scares. The one that gets me all the time, or used to get me all the time, was the one where there's like this camera angle, like the camera's positioned behind the plate of a baseball field, and someone is practicing, swinging the ball. And they're, trying to hit the pitches, and they're just constantly doing that. And as he's hitting these baseballs, you don't expect much. But then all of a sudden, he hits the baseball, but then the ball comes flying towards the camera. And literally every time I used to watch this, I would like dodge it, or like I would drop my phone. I would like freak out because I wasn't expecting it. But over time, once I started to anticipate this, and once I knew what was gonna come, dude, those things don't bother me anymore. Today we're looking at 1 Peter chapter 4, and here we find Peter going back to the ideal of suffering, and you see how he's a little bit more direct with the situation in which the believers are going through. Just in case you forgot, Peter is writing to a group of believers that are facing persecution, and the central theme of this book is hope. So chapter 4 is about suffering and understanding what they are to do with it. Peter is clear that suffering is not something that is unnatural. He believes that it's a given. It's something that we need to learn to embrace. And that's so true today. Some Christians grow up thinking, if I follow Jesus, there will be no suffering. But unfortunately, when you look at the Bible, it's a very opposite message. Because when we follow Jesus, there will be suffering. But what we discover is that the Bible writers understood that since we can't avoid suffering, what we can do and what we should do is that we can change our perspectives and have confidence that things will work out as long as we put our trust in Jesus. Look at 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 12 and 13. It says, "Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trials when it comes upon you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. but rejoice insofar as you share Christ's sufferings, that you may also rejoice and be glad when his glory is revealed. Peter makes it clear, don't be surprised. Why? Because there will be suffering. These fiery trials, don't be surprised. It's bound to happen. How often do we do this, right? Sometimes when bad things happen or when life throws a curveball at us, we think, oh my goodness, like where did that come from? I can't believe it. Why would these things happen to us? What did we do wrong? It's very natural to think this way. I think that way sometimes too, especially when things are going well, when we have a good relationship with God, we work hard at church, we go to church diligently, we spend time in prayer and in the word, but then things go wrong, we get surprised. Now, the suffering that Peter talks about here, there's two kinds. The first is suffering as a result of disobedience to God. We reap what we sow. But then there's the suffering that's kind of out of our control. It's a result of maybe other people or just the wickedness and evil of this world. But Peter here specifically is talking about this second one. Specifically, he's talking about the suffering that people are facing because of their identification with Jesus. There's nothing wrong with deciding to follow Jesus, but people have a problem with that, and that's something out of your control. Peter wants to tell us that these fiery trials, this suffering because of your association with Jesus, is something that we should expect. So we need to be alert of these things that can and will happen. But then he says to rejoice when you face these sufferings. Peter is looking at the positive aspect of suffering as a Christian. You see, suffering for the Christian must always be seen in the perspective of eternity, to change the perspective of looking to the fact that one day God will come and take us away from this world of evil, of suffering, of pain. That's a powerful promise, and it's clearly a hope that Peter wants us to hold on to when we face suffering. And I'm glad Peter gives us this heads up, and I hope you can appreciate it too, so that when we do face suffering in our lives, there will be no surprises. So church, remember this. Let's not be surprised when we face suffering. Instead, let's rejoice because God is so good.